Hello and welcome to My First Mixed Reality Shoot panel debate, coming to you from ARRI's new Mixed Reality stage. I'm Zoe Mutter, editor of British Cinematographer magazine, and I'll be your host for today's discussion. Uniting the real and virtual worlds, mixed reality production captures live action and CGI in camera simultaneously, using LED volumes and game engines synced with tracked cameras. To discuss today's topic, I'm joined by a fantastic lineup of panelists who'll be sharing their experiences of shooting in LED volumes and exploring the techniques and technologies they use to achieve realistic and creative results. On the panel today, we have cinematographers Greig Fraser ASC ACS, Ruhe ASC, Magdalena Gorka PSC, and cinematographer and director Robert Payton. And we also have Creative Director of DNEG, Visual Effects Supervisor and Director Paul Franklin. Thank you for joining me, everyone. And now to kick off the discussion, I'd just like to explore what a typical mixed reality setup looks like. So Rob, if we could come to you first, if you could talk us through some of the key technologies and also share your diagrams with us, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. Obviously what we've got is a merging of different technologies here. We've got the gaming technology interspersed with traditional cinematography methods, with visual effects, and also with LED volumes that traditionally have been used for display. So I mean, we can run through some of the key components of that.
Yeah, I think we were going to.
We could have a look at. I mean, at the heart of it, you've got a gaming engine which enables us to produce the real-time effects, and then that works in tandem with a render farm, which will output initially to an LED processor, then that will come up onto your LED screen. So that's basically getting your background onto the screen, but that's really just the beginning of the process, which I know the other guys are going to go into in a lot more detail shortly. So once we've done that, we can start thinking about our end of things, and traditionally the camera and lens, and how we integrate that within the mixed reality environment. So we're sending metadata from camera in real time into Unreal Engine to enable us to interact, and obviously all the lens data is going across at the same time. At the moment, there's been some interesting advances in the technology in terms of being able to push focus beyond the LED wall, and that's where we're at, and that's where a lot of people are exploring at the moment. And then finally, obviously, we need to locate the camera within that environment. So there's multiple tracking systems out there. I can see from the ceiling here that there's a Moses Star Tracker system in the studio at the moment. And that will then integrate with the Unreal Engine so that as you're moving within the 3D environment, all your parallaxes are staying the same.
Yeah. And are there any tech specs someone venturing into this area who might need to be aware of, for example, the LED?
Looking at this studio, this is kind of state of the art, I have to say. I mean, what ARRI've put together here with creative technology is kind of a pretty amazing space. I mean, we've got the InVision wall behind us, which is running on Rowe 2.3 mil panels. So this is pretty state of the art in terms of the tech. But no one space is right for any given production. But they've had a pretty good stab at it here. Obviously, we've got to integrate with traditional lighting fixtures. So that's the final part of the integration within Unreal, is volumetric lighting, and through DMX, running it back through a board and integrating with what's happening on the floor here.
So is there an advisable pixel pitch or brightness of LED screen?
You can get over obsessed with pixel pitch because quite often it's not just pixel pitch. It's it's about the viewing angle of the screens. It's about the brightness of the screens. It's about the dynamic range of the screens. I mean, on these screens we tested them to we were able to shoot about 2.5 to 3 meters off the screen. And come up with a realistic end result. But there's a number of panel manufacturers out there, but these worked very well. And with the signature prime lenses, which we tested on this screen, these were on the LF. It was a very good match. So that was the decision to build the studio using these screens.
Yeah. And I'd just like to take a look at the advantages of shooting in a volume such as this. So, Magdalena, have you experienced any benefits from shooting Star Trek Strange New Worlds in a volume?
Yes, the main advantage to shoot on a volume is having a full control of lighting scenarios and shooting in impossible locations. So for us, for example, because we're doing a sci-fi show, we can build any set we want, and we can also create any environment that we want. So, for example, for DPs, this is eternal magic hour. You can shoot the sunset for 12 hours from every angle. You just have to rotate the asset if you don't have a physical build. And also, you can use the wall as your lighting source. There is an ability of creating lighting discs and in any shape, in any color, which ultimately becoming a bounce cards, right? So to go along with the concept, you also can have a perfect weather conditions. You can shoot a snowy ice location in the morning, and in 20 minutes you can change the asset and be in a tropical oasis. So this redefining completely a location shooting, if you can afford it and if you can build the asset, then you can bring everything to the studio. And then for 12 hours, or however long the shoot day is, you can control the environment fully as a DP, which is a huge advantage. Yeah. And then there is no limit also to what can you do. So the sky is the limit, and it depends only on the production designer and the DP, because it just is your imagination, whatever you want to build when you shoot a sci-fi show.
And would anyone else like to add any more advantages they've enjoyed from shooting in a volume, for example, or the sustainability benefits as well, or the real-time collaboration?
For me, the economy is incredible. One of the bad things about filming in the real world is the physicalities of getting up and driving to a location and shooting and dealing with all the problems that Mother Nature has to offer, and all the good things as well. What this allows us to do is to be able to refine all of those things, put all the good things in a basket and use those things in the basket and not worry about all the problems. So it's the economy. It's not the financial economy, it's the time economy.
Yeah. And Paul, did you want to continue?
I was just going to say, with my experience, the cast really like being able to see what's meant to be there. You know, that if you're on a location, you can see the location. If you've built a set, you can see the set. But so much of genre filmmaking involves acres of green screen. Magdalena was talking about shooting Star Trek, which traditionally would have been shot against a green screen if you're doing big science fiction environments. And the first time, it wasn't a real-time interactive environment, but we did a lot of front projection on Interstellar a few years ago to create the vistas of space outside of the spacecraft. And that effectively turned the sets into sort of flight simulators from the point of view of the cast. And I think they got a real benefit out of that. And then also, just speaking from my position as somebody who comes from a visual effects background, you're able to make creative decisions on the set that otherwise just get pushed off into post, where everybody else has gone. And so you can make those decisions with the director of photography, with the production designer, as well as the director, rather than trying to guess what people might have been thinking had they confronted whatever scenario you're in 6 months later when everybody else has wrapped off the show and your work is just beginning. So there are a lot of very strong creative advantages, I think.
Yeah, and Rob, I know we were speaking about the sustainability side of it as well. I'm not sure if there's anything you wanted to add.
Well, I had been having conversations with a few advertising agencies about how they can best use the volume and come in and work with it. Yeah. And they were very excited about the sustainability from a sustainable point of view in terms of not having to fly a huge number of people all over the world. So you had that benefit. But also, if you've got a campaign that's going to continually go back to the same location or is going to continually require a set to be built, on a weekly or a monthly basis, there's such a huge amount of waste. So if you've got that asset pre-built for you and you can use that asset and literally dial it up. You can come in the studio, you can switch it on, you can be shooting straight away. So it wasn't something that I'd kind of thought of, but 2 or 3 advertising agencies have come to me now and said, wow, our clients are going to love this. It's so much more sustainable. So, it's a great side benefit.
Yeah, so there's plenty of advantages there. And I think now we're going to see the results of a mixed reality shoot, starting with Greig's work on The Mandalorian.
Bounty hunting is a complicated profession. Don't you agree?
Greig, if you could talk us through the setup you used there, and also how the workflow differed to a traditional workflow with the post being repositioned in the pre-production.
The thing to remember with this is we had to make this up because we didn't have a concept of what this was before we made it and before we discovered that it was actually going to work. So, we didn't really have a choice about what panels we could use because there was actually a limitation about what panels were available. So we had the 2.8 rows and we had the 5mm on the ceilings, and it was pretty good. Like, listen, the LED technology right now is still in its infancy. It's none of the LEDs that filmmakers are using are being made for filmmakers. So that's problem number one. So it's not being made with filmmakers in mind. So we had to effectively take off-the-shelf products that last week may have been used for a U2 concert, and a week after we wrapped might have been used in a shopping center installation. So we had to kind of take those tools and use those in an environment for filmmakers, which filmmakers work really hard at getting skin tone right and getting the cameras to look good on the lights to look good with the cameras, and we effectively just had to take the LEDs and make the best out of them. One thing that we discovered, or I discovered, that everyone has their own opinion about how a path should be taken when it's new. The film business is great because we've been doing it for 100 years, so everybody knows the process. This is such that you've got a lot of post people now working in prep, and they're bringing their post knowledge into prep, which sometimes doesn't work. And it's the same with cinematographers who are used to scouting locations and pre-lighting, and it doesn't actually work for some of the things that are required, which is normally done in post. So there's a lot of learning from the post side and from the prep side and from the production side. And so we effectively, what I determined was that effectively the path needs to stay exactly the same as it has for the last 100 years. There has to be a script. There has to be a discussion with the designer and the post supervisor and the director and the DP about how we're going to shoot something. Is it going to be done on a volume? Yes. If so, then is the design conducive for it to be done on a volume? And is it possible for the light to be conducive to be done on the volume? And then you've got to block it with the director so that when you're lighting. And this is the other thing with everyone's opinions differ at this point in time about what virtual shooting is, because, a lot of people go, wow, it's a video wall, so we can see exactly what we see on camera, which is true. But I think what's more important, and I think what cinematographers need to understand and acknowledge, is actually it's more of a lighting tool than it is a in-camera tool. It's a framing tool, of course, because you can see the background, and it's much better to shoot, obviously, when you see what the background's doing rather than pretending that in post and blue screen. But it's actually more important that it's a lighting tool, that and you can see with your eyes that the lighting on the subject matches the lighting on the screen. So then you can walk away and go to sleep at night going, well, I've made it match, and you don't have to guess like you would if you were shooting blue screen.
Did shooting in a volume affect your camera choice and lens choice? If you could just run me through that as well.
Well, yeah, because, as we touched on before, there is moire. Unfortunately, screens have moire. If you focus on them, they have moire. So we went through a number of different lighting lens and camera setups. And we were also doing Star Wars. And Star Wars has a certain visual language that occurs. And that visual language, listen, for the most part, is anamorphic. You could argue, depending on which prequel you're watching, that maybe it's not anamorphic. But the vast majority of Star Wars live-action films have been shot on anamorphic lenses. So that helped us. A large format helped us as well, because it meant with the LF and the Panavision anamorphics, the focus fell off fairly quickly. So because it falls off quickly, any of the disparity between the background being in or out of focus, it's not just moire too. There's also the fact that your screen might be 20 feet away from the camera, and you've got something on the screen that is pretending to be 21 feet away from camera, and then behind it there's a mountain range that's 1,000 feet from camera, yet they're going to be the same out of focus as they would be because they're a two-dimensional screen. So there's always going to be something not quite right with the focus there. So the more you can throw the background out of focus, which isn't good for everybody, because there are some people who want to use this technology and they want deep focus. They don't want that whole minimum focus look. So for us, we felt that anamorphic was the choice because it helped us hide the seams, the figurative seams in the technology.
Yeah. And do you have any tips regarding colour management of the real and virtual elements?
We were very fortunate in that we had a fantastic colour team that had a great big monitor, and they were watching what our camera put up and then what the screen was. And often what would happen is if a new scene was, if we didn't get a chance to pre-light and to set up this load, we called it, if we didn't get a chance in advance to set this up and we were doing it on the day of the shoot, you'd set the camera, you'd put a 50mm because it's a wide lens, you'd put a stand in with a tin helmet on, and you just look at it and say, all right, well, the dirt is a slightly more burnt orange color than the background. And they would then color grade the background to be the same color that the camera is rendering the foreground. Now, the problem with that is that if you change the color of the wall, it changes the color of the subject. So you're kind of like chasing your tail a bit, where if you're trying to change the color on set, you are changing the background and changing the wall. So it was all good. We had a very talented color team watching and changing the color for us.
Yeah. And have you learnt any other valuable lessons in terms of like syncing the camera with the wall?
No, to be honest with you, I tended to stay a bit out of the weeds of the geeky stuff. With how you sync it and what cameras and what frame rate. I mean, obviously the frame rate's in my wheelhouse, but all the techniques that they were using to do that, I tried to deliberately stay a little bit ignorant of. I did watch them, and when they were taking a bit long, I'd obviously say, "Hey, why is that taking too long?" And then they'd either tell me or they'd go, "Oh, sorry, it's fine." But yeah, I didn't really get involved in that.
Yeah. And does anyone else have anything to add in terms of syncing the camera with the wall? Anything they've learnt along the way?
Maintaining synchronization with the camera is a challenge.
Yeah.
The one thing that I think a lot of people need to be aware of is all this technology. There isn't like an off-the-shelf virtual studio system you can buy. It's essentially a bunch of different technologies which have all converged, which are brought together, and it's glued together by this game engine technology. And one of the big tricks is getting this big image onto this screen here. This is much higher resolution than somebody who's going to be playing on a video game at home. So the computers which are generating these images in real time are essentially souped up video game players' machines with very, very high performance graphics cards. But they still aren't capable of kicking out whatever this is probably about 12,000 lines across the, so it's a 12K image. So this image has to be broken down into multiple nodes on the render farm, which is a live render farm that's here on the set. So it's not sitting in the basement of somebody's visual effects facility. And that all has to run in synchronization with the movement of the camera. And synchronizing all of that is a bit of a dark art, to say the least. And so it's, you have to have a pretty good technical team on the set with you, because my experience has been that problems do throw themselves up all the time. And you're always balancing the load on the computers against the performance on the screen, because you need to maintain 24 frames a second. If it drops a single frame, the deal's off. It's not going to work, and you're going to be fixing that in post later on. And again, you'll hit the performance limits on the software and the computers quite quickly with something of this level of complexity. And if you start adding people to that, which are very, very complex, little digital people walking around, it'll fall over pretty quickly. So extensive testing.
There's also the delay as well, yeah? The delay.
The latency.
To consider.
Exactly, yes. The latency, the delay. It takes a little while for the computer to do all the calculations to figure out what the image should look like and where to place it after it's tracked the position of the camera. And this induces a delay of anything, it could be 6 or 7 frames. And this is the latency in the camera movement. So when you move the camera quickly, the image will noticeably lag behind it. Now, if you're framed tight on someone and you're playing minimum focus, like Greig was saying, that's fine, you can get away with it. It just feels like a little bit of extra parallax in the background. But if you've got physical foreground set elements that are against it, they will weave against the background as the camera moves. And your camera crew has to be aware of that, because you're basically trying to hide that in the movement of the camera. And then later on, when you get into post, if you need to match move it to drop other CG elements into it, it confuses the heck out of the match move software, because again, it's a non-naturalistic layer of parallax which has been added to the image. So all these, I'm sure that will get better. The computers will get faster, the tracking technologies will get better, but right now it is an issue.
Thank you.
It's interesting that we're all encountering the same issues. We've got panelists sitting here globally, and everybody's going through productions, and it feels like quite a pioneering spirit, that everybody's out there, and we're learning as we go along, and we're at the forefront, if you like, of a developing technology. But I was chatting with some DOPs in Australia, and all the challenges that I was having, they were having as well. Yeah. So it's just interesting to see that we're all encountering the same issues.
Yeah, that's why this is great to share knowledge amongst yourselves. And
I think also, too, the point that you're getting at is when everybody uses it more, they'll start to realise the limitations of the technology. Because like you guys I'm sure you've had these conversations, producers saying we want to do X, Y, and Z, and they want to. The way I describe it's like trying to fit a round peg in a square hole. Sometimes it just doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't look good. And if it doesn't look good, it'll give virtual production a bad name, because suddenly someone has made a decision based on bad information that they've either come up themselves or they haven't tested. And they'll make a decision to put something on a volume that should not be on a volume. And when that happens and it's a big enough event, it could be negative for virtual production, because it'll give it a bad name.
Yeah. And now we're going to watch another clip. This time it's The Midnight Sky, which saw Martin Ruhe shoot certain scenes on a mixed reality pop-up stage.
Come in, Ether. This is Barbo Observatory. Are you receiving this? Is anyone out there?
This is Ether. Does anyone copy? We're not receiving anything.
That puts our last contact with Mission Control at
3 weeks.
Why is it so quiet?
That's Ether. It's a spaceship that we hoped would be our future. I have to warn them about the conditions on Earth.
I don't know all the details. It started with a mistake.
There is an antenna that's stronger than ours.
We get to that antenna, they'll hear us.
Take a deep breath.
In our galaxy alone, there are billions of stars. At least one of them has the potential to support life.
I'm thinking a lot about time. Why one person lives a lifetime and another only gets a few years.
We made a promise to our families.
You want to be an explorer.
Cut to my voice!
But while you're doing all that, your own life is just slipping away.
That's why I have to contact them. Before it's too late.
Fabulous. Now, Martin, could you just begin by explaining how you decided which scenes you would shoot on location and which you'd shoot in the volume?
Our film is a little bit different because we didn't use the volume that much. I mean, for us, it was we built the Arctic station, which is where Augustine's character lives, and then where he gets together, he finds a 7-year-old girl. And that was a set built in Shepparton, and we shot some exterior shots in Iceland on a glacier. But we used the volume, we used the LED wall for everything you see from the outside, from the inside looking out of the Arctic station. So it's very different use than what Greig did and what you see very often. Because for us, it was more like everything outside the windows was done, plates which we shot 6 weeks before, which then were processed by ILM and then were put on the screen. We had a practical set, which is the interior Arctic station, and everything you see outside. So we had a 120-foot wall which was 24 feet high. And then that was basically how we used it.
And you have some diagrams to show as well. So if you could just talk us through those. If we could just show the first visual, please.
So that's basically the real location, where we also did some exterior shots and where we split some set pieces. So we calculated the height of the camera. We set crew out there. It was very important that from the windows we would see the horizon line. So that gave us the camera height. We shot the plates with 3 Alexa 65s. The whole film was shot on Alexa 65 mainly. And that's what we did 6 weeks before we started shooting the studio sets. On the other diagram, you can see how we had the set built and where we put the wall outside. And at the bottom, you see the big wall. That was basically our LED wall. Then in the control room, we put another LED screen in front when we were shooting up there. For us, it was a big advantage was basically that we had a 7-year-old girl, which was she didn't have much acting experience, and every mood, it was night and stormy or daytime in the Arctic station, they could see. That was the biggest advantage. She could see what was out there. We had big windows, lots of reflections would have been there. And all of that, we used the LED wall, basically, the large LED wall.
And are there any techniques you can share with us of how you married the virtual and real elements in the set? How you blended those two seamlessly?
Well, basically, it's the same as Greg described. I couldn't hear much of what you said, but I think you do it by eye. You do tests. When we planned our studio set, we built in a lot of LED lights. So there's a lot of Asteras built in. There's a lot of LED lights and a lot of practical lighting in them. But that means also something I didn't think of before is that when we shot night scenes to run the LED at a very low level gets a bit complicated because we wanted our dark sky, it takes place in the Arctic. We wanted the Arctic night to be quite dark. So to get that out of the LED wall is a bit tricky because it has to project light. And the lower, if you run at very low percentages of the illumination, then you might get weird effects. And the guys in the render farm had to work around that sometimes. That was the most tricky thing because we couldn't just pump up all the practicals and we didn't have enough time to change those.
Martin, can I ask you what panels you used?
Oh, I wouldn't know. We tested a few. I think I would forget, but we tested everything available in the UK. We shot in London, and I think we had the finest pitch we could find.
I think it's the Ruhe Black Pearl. I'm pretty sure, but I hope I'm not wrong on that. I'm pretty sure it's
forgetting those.
A number of what we're all learning is exactly that you're talking about. The low end of LEDs doesn't work as nearly as good as it should. And if you start dialing it down, it starts blocking up and becoming really bad. So it's one of the deficiencies of the current LED batch. There are ones out there, I think, that work better in lower end, but they're not as bright. So there's often a trade-off when you're deciding which panels to go for. You almost need to become an expert of LED manufacturing to fully understand it. But there's not one panel that kind of does everything. It goes back to the point earlier about there's not one studio or stage setup that's perfect for everything.
Yeah. And just opening this question up to everyone, is there a particular environment or type of scene that is best suited to shooting in a mixed reality stage, would you say?
Hard light is difficult to do. So that was my experience.
Yeah.
So
high key scenes can be quite tricky to achieve, but you're generally going to be using your lighting from your LEDs in addition to conventional fixtures.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get plenty of exposure out of the LED screen, but it's never going to give you hard light. So it's about supplementing with hard light to add that realism.
Yeah. And Martin, did you?
Hard light for wides is really hard because anybody can put the HMI in and create a backlight. But when you cut out wide, you start to see shadows, and then you have to light two people in a scene, and you've got multiple shadows. Hard light is the current, the holy grail of virtual production.
So you said you've been doing that with traditional lighting setup. You've been adding that into the volume.
You have to because the LEDs don't have enough punch.
Yeah.
No.
Yes, I would say that. Sorry.
No, carry on.
I would say for me the best environments were like planets and natural environments that would be, in space. So if we can control very soft light and we can create the sky that is without using a hard sunlight, because that's very difficult to achieve on the stage. And quite complicated it was to marry very complex sets that have a lot of LED built in the physical set and then in the asset. So this would be a very complex and time-consuming thing to achieve on the wall.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. And now we're going to move on to our next clip, which is behind-the-scenes insight into Paul's short film Fireworks.
we started developing a fully immersive version of fireworks, which you would experience with a headset on.
We were looking at using volumetric capture as a means of capturing an actor's performance in virtual reality, treating it as a piece of immersive theatre.
It is incumbent upon me to ask you.
I started investigating virtual production technology, particularly this concept of the LED volume.
Paul came in and directed, just an early camera test, I suppose, called Gunslinger.
There was this key moment. I was standing on set, directing a virtual production test, and I turned to Steve and Annalise and I said, we should make fireworks as a regular film again, but we should use this technology. We're here in a little warehouse on an industrial estate outside of London, filming this, and yet we're able to bring the world of Tripoli to the set. All of this was designed by Jamie Lapsley, our brilliant production designer.
The project was a chance, in a way, for me as a designer to design a whole city. And using Unreal, I was able to realise that in a way that I could never do normally.
Of course, we were designing the Tripoli component inside the Unreal Engine. It's a virtual world. And we could enter into that virtual world by putting on a VR headset, and you could walk around. So I could walk around that digital set. And I quickly realised that I could actually shoot out there. That was a realisation that came to me when I was exploring it in VR. I was able to walk around the room, and then I'd look into the viewfinder on the iPad, and it would show me this world. And then I could share that with my cinematographer, with Ollie Downey.
That was amazing. Being able to put on a headset and explore a set that you haven't set foot on with the headset, then you really can get to the crux of that very comprehensively. A sort of third member of the triangle became a guy called Greig, who's part of the virtual art department, who built the world and who also kind of acts as a virtual gaffer, I suppose.
The main screen behind us will be showing the environment, and then we have side panels and the ceiling panel to represent more of the scene wrapping around the characters.
We can place anywhere on a sort of either a circle or a beam of light, and so we can pick and choose where that goes, and we can move it around.
We'll have just the blue, please, on them.
Craig, take global contrast down to 1.25, please.
So that's looking better, isn't it? Moving forward, I think it would be vital that Greig is sat next to our lighting desktop. They're running similar software. You want to calibrate their systems in similar ways, because the way Greig works in his world, they use different kind of currencies to what we use in our sort of practical filming world, in terms of the amount of green or magenta in a light. We're talking eighths or quarters or halves, and he was rotating a colour wheel, which affects other things. So given enough time in prep, you could get to a really good place where Greig isn't having to sort of interpret what we're asking for, and we're not interpreting what Greig is offering.
Wonderful. And would you like to share a bit more insight into the creation of the load and how early in the process you need to start creating those assets? Because it was touched upon there, but just to elaborate.
Sure. Well, I should point out that Fireworks is a short film. It's we've been backed by Epic Games, who gave us a mega grant to fund the project, and it started life as just a very straightforward short film set inside a single location, which is it follows a group of people who work in an MI6 special operations room, who are supervising a mission in Tripoli in Libya, where they're trying to eliminate a dangerous militant. And the original plan, because I've been developing this short film for the last couple of years, was just to shoot it in one location. We would never see the other world of Tripoli. It was just purely about the people in the room. And as I mentioned in the little clip there, we started originally, actually, at one point, we were investigating making an immersive version of it, which would be a full VR experience where you'd be in the room with the people. And this offered up the possibility of opening up the world, because once it was in the digital space, you can do pretty much whatever you want. So I thought, well, let's start showing this other world. Let's show the world of Libya, of Tripoli, where these other people live, who are, going to, they're in the line of fire from these people who are over in London, who kind of ignoring them. And at the same time, I was also investigating the idea of using an LED volume and how that would actually work. And we shot this little test with the cowboy that you saw briefly in the thing there. And I had this sort of epiphany, which is why don't we just go back to making fireworks as a regular film? But now we can use this technology to explore these story ideas that we developed through the immersive version of the film. So it felt to me that this was a sort of an organic reason to use the technology in the first place. It wasn't that I was trying to shoehorn it into the film, because in its original version there would have been no reason to use virtual production technology at all. And we then set about saying, well, how are we going to use it? We wanted to use it to show this other world, and we essentially turned one end of the set into the volume, which effectively the wall dissolves away at one point in the film. The ops room wall dissolves away and reveals this target location. And they're not physically meant to be there. It's a cinematic conceit. So we're using it in a sort of somewhat experimental art house kind of fashion. And we then realized, well, we had to design both these worlds, the physical world of the ops room, which is a sort of very traditional sort of, if you want to call it that, sort of MI6, James Bond, Mission Impossible type environment. And then the world of the marketplace in Tripoli. And so Jamie approached that as one continuous thing. That she designed the physical set, and then the rest of it, we just treated it as one continuous space. And as I mentioned in the little clip there, this meant that we had everything inside the computer, and so we could explore it using the VR tools of Unreal. So everything, all the 3D graphics in the film, all created with Unreal, and it was very much a design tool as well for actually putting the movie together. But one of the things that we found was that we ran up very quickly against the limitations, at least the limitations at the time of the game engine. It's improved significantly just in the last few months. But in my visual effects work, I'm very used to the extremely sophisticated offline renderers that we use for creating photorealistic imagery, which blends hopefully seamlessly with the principal photography in the film. And Unreal is it's designed to do something different. It's a game engine. It wasn't designed originally to do photorealistic cinematic imagery. So it was a little bit like taking a step back in time to where offline renderers were maybe 10, 15 years ago, which is fine because I've been working with computer graphics for 3 decades. So I've seen every stage of the development of graphic technology over the last, well, since the end of the 1980s. And you have to work a little bit harder because the software doesn't give you all the lighting effects for free. So you need to be able to dial that all in. So I spent a lot of time working very closely with the virtual art department to dial that in. And I think, we've got to something which, it's a sort of heightened reality that we've got out of it. I should stress that the clip we just showed, nothing is graded. The colors are bouncing all over the place. I think it will look quite a bit more punchy than that by the time we've actually finished. But the game engine technology, on the one hand, whilst it's not quite at the moment got the sophistication that I'm used to in the offline world, it more than makes up for that with the fact that it's happening in front of your eyes rather than I give a note and wait a week for it to happen. Quite often Craig, who built the environment, who you saw in the film with the hat on, he would finish the note whilst I was actually saying it. So we had a lot of interactive time, placing things in the environment, dressing the sets, creating the right look, figuring it all out. And we also used Unreal as a technical visualization tool to design the set. We had to cut our suit to fit our cloth, because we didn't have the budget of a big Hollywood production. It's Epic were very generous, but this kind of filmmaking is expensive. Yeah. So there were a few compromises that we made, which I would do differently next time round. One of the things that nobody's mentioned so far is that obviously you're lighting your set, and you get a lot of bounce into the panels themselves. You get a lot of contamination, and it tends to melt them out. And you lose contrast. So that's something that's also you need to be aware of if you're shooting especially if you're trying to put hard light on things in the foreground, as Greg mentioned. But yeah, it was a great experience. We're very close to finishing. I think we should be grading next week or the week after.
Fantastic, because you wore many hats on that production, so I just wondered, how does that collaboration process differ? Because you've got the virtual art department, the LED technicians.
Virtual art department speaks the same language as visual effects. So, and as I say, I'm very familiar with those technologies, and I'm kind of intimately acquainted with the technology pipeline that drives something like this. And there's a lot of crossover with visual effects technologies. But you're trying to stay on top of that and keep the creative through line of the film. And of course, most of my time was spent working with the cast whilst we were shooting it. But I was also very aware of all the technical dramas that were going on in the background. And it's good. It's good to have some understanding of that, because if something goes wrong, then you need to think on your feet very quickly to say, well, how do I keep going? How do I keep shooting? Can I just freeze the image in the background and just use it essentially as a big translight at this point? Does it matter that I'm not getting the full parallax at this stage? Those sorts of things. So an understanding of what's actually going on in the technology is kind of useful. But then I think on a bigger production, you would expect to have an experienced virtual production supervisor or visual effects supervisor, preferably both, with you on the set that could advise you on those things. But I was sort of doing that myself a little bit, working very closely with the virtual production team.
And does anyone else have anything to add about the asset creation and allocating more time in the production for that, or any other prep you did? I think, Magdalena, do you have anything to say about that?
Yes, it's a very crucial, because this takes a long time, and that's something to take into consideration whenever you're planning virtual production like this. Because to build an environment, it takes from 11 to 20 weeks, depending on the asset that you're building. And then it's quite grueling, because it's a lot of steps that you have to go through. First of all, production designer is coming up with the concept, and then virtual production design, which in my case is a Pixelmondo. They are creating this, and first time you see something like this is on a multiple Zoom meeting with a lot of people, and you see just a gray environment that is just a base, and then you have to light it, and you have to come up with everything that's going to make this environment interesting, and also it's going to create the depth. So using light to create depth, and then you adding all the little lights that go into this environment. So it's just a lot of steps, and it takes like 5 weeks for us to light it. And Pixelmondo is telling us what are we lighting at the moment, which part, and how far we can go with that. And it's quite amazing, because we are drawing this with the pens on the Zoom meetings, and in real time, they actually creating this for us. So it's an amazing tool for the DP. And I just... I really enjoy that. And it just takes a lot of departments coming together and creating this. And so what's also great is that you can pick pretty much anything for your assets. Like you can pick any sky, and then you can augment this. And you can pick any lighting conditions, and you have a full control of that. So it's quite amazing.
Yeah, thank you. Now we're going to watch our last clip, which is Rob's test clip, Tokyo Nights, and it was shot on this stage to push the camera and the screens to their limits. And so you were shooting that to test various aspects. Could you run us through those and also your findings
Yeah, sure.
of those?
I mean, there's a bit of background. I mean, a beta space was built here last year, and then ARRI invited me along to come and play in their sandpit and test the gear. And we just thought, rather than doing conventional scope tests, and let's do a couple of real-life scenarios. Yeah. So, I mean, specific to that, we were testing different frame rates. We were seeing how close we could work to the volume. And as Paul was referring to earlier, you know, the latency issue is a massive, massive thing for us. So fast handheld camera moves. Yeah, I mean, there was probably 8 or 9. The guys from ARRI in Germany and Creative Technologies all had elements that they wanted to test and specific tests to do. And I said, well, let's try and incorporate them all within that environment. And, you know, black levels, as we were saying, you know, working with a very dark environment. The one interesting thing that we were able to do on that was outside of the frustum, obviously to run the same scene, but at a different exposure level. So we were able to keep the exposure right down within the frustum, but we were getting some additional fill light by running the exposure outside the frustum at a higher level. So yeah, I mean, given that, again, ungraded test films, I mean, it kind of was a good proof of concept. Yeah. And it actually changed the way that the studio was designed in several respects, both in terms of the shape of the curve and the height of the volume. So, you know, useful exercise.
Yeah. And what about the lighting side of things? Because one of the advantages is the natural reflections on the car, which you could see in that clip. Was there anything else you found out that was interesting in terms of illumination? Well,
one of the things we wanted to test, which is why I wanted to bring a shiny car and a woman in a shiny dress in, was I wanted to see how critical it would be to have the ceiling piece in. And on that particular test, we didn't have the benefit of a ceiling piece, so I was actually just bouncing, you know, into conventional 20 by 20. So it was certainly having the ceiling piece would have given us more flexibility and more creativity. Yeah. But the other nice thing is just being able to set the levels of those reflections. So you know, you're lighting your artist, but you've got complete control over the level that those reflections sit at. And I think that's one of the most exciting things about this technology, is it's combining control and creativity, which is kind of doesn't happen that often in our industry. You're either getting increased control or you're getting increased creativity. Yeah. So to have both of those hand in hand was fantastic.
And does anyone else have any experiences of that working with reflective surfaces, like Greig with the Mandalorian, with the armour? Was there anything else you have to add there?
Well, I mean, that's one of the things that's the most successful about the volume, and that's all the tests we did early on. We knew we were going to have a reflective character, but how reflective was going to be the question. So that led to us having to design a volume specifically for that character, which meant that there was no seam in the ceiling, that the ceiling basically went off the edge. So wherever the helmet looked at, the reflections of the helmet looked at was free of any holes in the ceiling or the walls. So that was a very integral part of our design. So going forward, you know, the perfect design of a volume maybe doesn't have the seamless ceiling, because that makes a very hard working practice. The studio becomes like an egg, like a car egg. So, you know, having access for lights and rigging and all those other things are very important. But for me, the way when I've spoken to DPs about how to use a volume or how to think about a volume, I kind of explain to them, like, if you think about it like you would normally, let's say you go out to the desert and you want to shoot a desert scene at dusk. Do you need a ceiling? Well, if you don't have a ceiling, it's like going to the desert and putting up a 75-foot wide solid above the camera, 20 feet above the camera and the subject. I said, will it look the way you want it to look if you do that? If it does, then you can have no ceiling. But if you don't think that's going to be acceptable, then you need something up there to create the light that comes from that direction.
So would you all say that this setup is suitable for different types of production, not just big blockbusters, so lower budget productions?
Yeah, I think it will become that way. At the moment, it's just the cost is significant, and you also have to assemble a pretty strong team of technicians from the virtual production world to put it together. But I think, you know, the great thing is that, because of the fact that Unreal in particular is this mass market tool that's backed by this enormous video games company, And they are doing their level best to get as many people as possible to learn the tool. They're being extremely generous with their training. I think there will be a lot of people will learn how to use it pretty quickly in the next year or so. But I think what lower budget productions, low production like fireworks, for example, really needs is permanent volumes that are set. We built our own volume. We worked very closely with the folks over at 86. They constructed our screen for us. We actually built it in their warehouse because they wanted to see what it was like to actually make a film this way. And so a lot of our effort went into actually constructing the facility. If you can come on and rent a stage like this, and everything's already set up with the camera tracking all in place, because we had to build all that ourselves as well. So we built everything from scratch. If somebody's already figured out, well, this is the best camera package. We used the Mini LF, the ARRI Mini LF, which was perfect for us for what we needed to do because it talks to all the other bits of kit in the hardware chain. Then I think that will make it much more accessible to people.
Yeah.
And also, you don't always have to be working within a 3D environment. I mean, you can be coming in and doing vehicle plates, and taking advantage of of using the LED for lighting. And this is what Martin was saying earlier. This is only one component. The InVision element is only one component of it. And when you've got somewhere like this that's quite modular, I think you can use it in quite a cost-effective way. You don't always have to be building, and they are very expensive to create because they're very time-consuming. So you don't always have to be working within a 3D environment. I mean, the one thing that's really clear from the technology now, and there's an Agito little dolly going back and forth there at the moment. That's now going to be integrated into Unreal. So Agito will be pushing real-time metadata, everything related to that back in. And all of the camera manufacturers and lens manufacturers are accepting that this is a technology that's here to stay. So it's now very much about integration of all of these bits of hardware, into the Unreal world. Yeah, I mean, maybe out of COVID was a little bit of a catalyst, and it piqued people's interest a little bit. But it was nothing more than a catalyst. I mean, Greig's been doing this for, way before COVID and developing this technology. So yeah, I mean, it's exciting here to stay.
So you think the modularity is key also to open it up to more?
I think having a permanent volume where you're not having to build it every time and introduce tracking systems, I think having a permanent volume like this is great. And I think also being able to use it more in a modular way is to say, well, actually, I don't need 30 meters by 5 meters all the time, or I don't need the ceiling piece, or I don't need whatever. And I think, there's a lot of creative people out there who are going to find fascinating ways of using this new piece of technology. There's a lot of very clever people out there.
I think one thing that occurs to me is that, if anything, I think lower budget productions are going to push the technology harder, if only for the reason that they don't have the luxury of replacing everything later on in post. And that's actually something that's really important that any filmmaker that's considering going this route really thinks about, which is that you have to treat the creation of the virtual asset that goes into the LED just as seriously as you do any part of your physical set build or any other part of principal photography. If you just think of it as being, it's just another part of visual effects and I can fix that in post later on, then you'll end up spending the money twice. And you have to give it the same degree of consideration as everything else. And if you think about it, if you're doing something on a very small budget and you've paid to be on this stage, then you're going to make very sure you get the most out of that, so that you're not having to do that later on in post.
And we've covered a fair few of these throughout the discussion, but I just wonder if there are any other limitations that you wanted to highlight for people that are going to be experiencing a mixed reality shoot for the first time. Any restrictions you've experienced and how you overcame those? Magdalena, did you want to take that one?
Yes. For me personally, the camera movement, speed and tracking, because different set pieces block sensors, or there are random dead zones where the tracking bumps. And if the camera moves too fast, the wall can't keep up to the tracking. Therefore, fast pans are not yet fully possible because engine cannot keep up, and it creates strubbing. So this is something that actually makes us develop a different language, that it's more elegant into filming. We can't go crazy handheld because then a frustrum cannot keep up. And then shooting a slow motion, it's not there yet, and off speed because the traditional shutter rates on a camera don't line up with the wall, and we get a flicker and a scan lines. And what else? A depth of focus is something that you have to be very aware of. So in my case, we're shooting a large format anamorphic, which helps us to defocus the background, but also you have to be very aware of the distance of the camera and the object to the wall, because all you want to do is to make it look real. And this is the biggest challenge so far. And also one thing that is quite challenging is animation, because animation can be so far very limited on the wall. I personally was using lightnings and lights like conduits that would move in my assets. But for example, having a waterfall, it didn't work for us yet.
Yeah, and Martin, did you experience any other limitations when you were shooting Midnight Sky you want to mention?
No, not really. I loved it. We ran a couple of times into interference when we had to change a lens or when we had to shift focus, because also our setup was not ideal. The wall was sometimes quite close to our set. But then we changed the lens or didn't focus deep on the wall or something like that.
Yeah. And what do you all think's next for mixed reality? What advances do you still think need to be made for it to become even more realistic?
Faster computers, more robust camera tracking systems. Which the same things I think there's else is talking about really. In terms of the content creation, I know that again, Epic and there's other real-time engines as well. People are putting a lot of effort into increasing the usability of those tools for this sort of content creation. And and it takes a while to develop those things. If you think about how visual effects software is developed, when I first started, we were still drawing things out on graph paper and then digitizing the pixel coordinates. Which makes me sound really old, but it actually wasn't that long ago in the history of cinema, and the tools have become very usable or relatively usable. They're still sort of expert friendly, and I would say the same is still true of all the real-time engines at the moment. But it is improving, I think, quite rapidly. If for no other reason than there's a vast demand for content, not in this world, but in the interactive world, which is where all these real-time engines come from.
Yeah. And are there any innovations?
Integration of conventional lighting fixtures with the wall, I think that can, that's being worked on, and there's some, that can be improved on as well. Yeah. One thing that I'd be curious to ask the guys who aren't here about is, if you're working within a fantasy environment, my fear with this is when you're building photorealistic, real-time scenes for present-day 21st century shoot, because there's obviously a degree of artistic license when you're dealing within a fantasy environment. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on that, of working within photorealistic, current day, using the volume for those kind of things.
Well, can I interject, because sorry, I talked over somebody. Sorry. I think that the stuff that we were doing on Mandalorian, and even the stuff that I was seeing Martin do, even though it's fantastical or it's fantasy, I still feel like it has to feel real. It has to look real. Otherwise, the audience will actually not buy it as being right. So I think there's always that pitch to try and make it as real as possible, from my perspective anyway.
And Magdalena, did you want to speak?
We, apart from sci-fi environment, we built some of our sets on a volume, like physical enterprise sets, which is still a spaceship. But for example, we built a mess hall, and that's something that can be used in realistic filmmaking, because we just built a normal mess hall with the walls, and just you have to just be aware of lighting it. And for me, I would just opt for low lighting. This way, it looks more realistic. And then you just add tables and lights into physical stage to blend it all together, and that worked quite well.
Just to finish with, I wonder if there were any innovations anyone's particularly excited about that could take mixed reality to the next level. Greg, have you heard of anything that's exciting you?
Everything. I mean, the thing to remember about this is that this is the version 1.0 of what this technology is. Remember, everything we're doing, as some other panelists have said, we're all getting this stuff off the shelf. None of this stuff, very few of these things are made specifically for our industry. And the second that we start making graphics cards, particularly so that we can run multiple cameras through multiple frusтрums, then you've got 3 cameras at once on a big volume, all seeing correct perspective backgrounds, for example. And that doesn't exist right now. You can't do that. Once we have panels that are really good off axis, suddenly our limitations about putting actors closer to the wall are less limited. So we can make volumes that aren't this curvature shape, which, the unfortunate reality, the only reason they're a curve, from Mandalorian, the only reason they were a curve was because everywhere you looked with the camera needed to be as front on to the panels as possible. So at some point in the future, the panels are going to be so good off axis that it doesn't matter. You don't have to angle them or tilt them to see good color rendition. And eventually, again, maybe 5-10 years down the track, we're going to have a very fine pixel pitch. So hopefully there'll be no pixels. The camera will never see any more. So, and then it's just a way of thinking. What excites me more than anything else, actually, is actually what independent filmmakers and independent photographers are going to do with this technology, knowing it exists. Stuff that none of us on this panel right now are thinking about or could comprehend. Somebody will come up with a really smart idea about, building set pieces out of LED, like movable set pieces, or doing some music video where they use 20 LED panels and that changes shape or, in camera. So there's a ton of opportunities with this technology that no one's thought of, especially me, but no one's thought of yet, but will become evident very soon with more access to the technology.
Yeah, it'll be exciting to see what happens next in the world of mixed reality. And
it's fascinating because it's sky is the limit, and like everyone that is start working with this have like another idea how to make it better. Like for example, we would put a vinyl floor and reflect the set in the floor, so we had like a double set for one of our setups, and so and on and on and on. It's exactly what Greg is talking about. It's for DPs is just the border is only our imagination, and you can do anything, and that was never possible before.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I think that's all the time we have for today, but I'd just like to thank all of our panelists for sharing their insight. It's been fascinating, and I hope it's been useful for everyone watching. So thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, you.
Guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.